Hello, everybody. Today we're going to take a look at debugging a Python file. So this is a file we made a little bit earlier, and this will be true for any file you make. Python is very strict, and a lot of programming languages are, with the way that you write your code. So I've injected some of the common errors that you'll see, that you'll encounter as you start making your programs. So let's start fixing them. You can see there's lots of red underlines in the file, lots of highlights. Everywhere you see that, that's should be like a little red flag for you to start looking at that specific area of code and maybe investigate. So on line one, we're just going to go top to bottom. This is where I put the name of the file, but that needs to be commented out. So this pound sign, this hashtag, this shift, what is it, shift 3. This is how you comment out a line. So the compiler just ignores that code. You could write whatever you want there. It doesn't have to be anything specific for Python to read. Python will just skip over it. On line 3 here, where we defined our main function, there are very strict rules when you create a function. And in this case, the first thing it needs to have is the DEF, the name of the function that you want to give it. It needs to have these two parentheses, and it's also missing a colon. So that colon fixes our main function. Now, the next error here is probably a little bit harder to see, but Python is very strict with its tabs and its spaces. You need to be very consistent. And what I've done here is I've actually made it inconsistent. There's 3 spaces here, there's 4 spaces here, or a tab. If you're going to use spaces, just make sure you're consistent. There's a large argument on the internet about which is better. Whatever you want to do is my view, but just make sure you're consistent. So it automatically spaced that for me when I pressed enter, but that fixed the error that we saw earlier. You can see you get underline right here on the width, the first letter width. That goes away when we correctly tab or space our file. Now you'll see this gray text over the word width. That's saying you're not using that variable, but we know we're supposed to be using that variable. We also see this red underline here. That's a typo. So typos will break your program. You need to make sure there are no typos. I removed that typo. We can see that the color of this variable width returned back to white, and the red underline went away here. The red underline here is referring to the lack of variables. Really, if you're trying to print something to the screen, if it's not a variable value, everything should be in quotes. Sometimes it'll automatically do 2. Right here it does 2 quotes. So you just have to be aware. It needs to be a set of open and closing quotes there. And so that fixes everything inside our main function. There were no errors on line 8. And then finally we have main here. But to call this function, rather to run this code, so we've created a block of code that we want to run. In order to run it correctly, it must match, and it needs to have the open and close parentheses. That's how Python knows you're saying to run this block of code. So real quick, we'll run this code and verify everything works. And it does. If it doesn't work, you should see errors down here. Like, let's create an error real quick just to see. None of the code ran, but it assumed that code, it kind of ignored it. So let's create an actual error here. So yeah, you have a lot of code in red here. That's not necessarily code, that's just an error message. So the error message in red, it even helps you kind of find what to look for here. And it tells you what line it's on. So on line 6, it's saying the error exists, which is interesting because really the error is on line 4, but it's noticing that you're trying to use a variable name. You're trying to use a variable name that doesn't exist. That's the error that we're seeing here. So that's why the error is on line 6. But I would personally say the error was on line 4 because of the typo. But both work. You could also create a typo here and you would get a similar error. But yeah, that's a quick rundown of some simple common bugs that you're going to see in your Python programs. Just be wary of them. There's plenty more we'll cover later, but for now, that's where we'll finish. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.